UW-Madison and a mom of a college freshman in New York, I follow the parent and family Facebook groups dedicated to supporting students at these two schools. Do any of your parents belong to these pages? Have they told you what's on there? Despite being very different, right? UW-Madison, large, public, land-grant university in the Midwest. My daughter's at a small, religious, liberal arts college on the East Coast. The culture of the groups, the conversations, are very much the same. So, sometimes parents share useful information, they reach out to get or provide reassurance, and on much too frequent an occasion, make snide, judgmental remarks, which results in moderators intervening to turn off the comments. And then, when people make a new post to continue the argument, moderators will ban the topic. And finally, when that still does not work, moderators will remove people. It's happened quite often. It's really quite impressive and depressing how fast folks can get into fighting over anything and everything. So we are in the second week of our series, We Are Not the Same. And today we are wrestling with the question, so what do we do? What do we do? In this election season, our already normally hostile public discourse has been dialed up, if that were even possible, it has been dialed up to such a vitriolic volume that many of us try to mute or avoid these conversations because they're so nasty. The fear of being accused, or canceled, or attacked for expressing a sentiment that is different from the people around you, it prevents many of us from engaging in deeper discussions with folks who are not the same. Anybody feel that? We retreat further into our bubbles with social media algorithms reinforcing what we already think, to the point where we cease to even interact with those who we do not agree with. According to a study published by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, no established wealthy democracy in recent history has been as deeply polarized as the United States. Like, this is something special in the worst possible way. So, what do we do? We've been looking at one of the letters that the Apostle Paul wrote to the Corinthians. People read that for us today. A church that was mired in division. So, as a reminder, Corinth was a large city located on an isthmus, kind of like Madison's on an isthmus, except that it had two major trading ports because it was a much bigger bodies of water. And it made its population diverse in every possible imaginable way. They also seem to disagree about everything: gender, sexual behavior, marriage, dietary habits, idols, worship style, beliefs. You get the idea. And it was contributing to a growing animosity in the community. If we look at their backgrounds of the members of the Corinthian church, one can understand why. So when the Apostle Paul founded the Corinthian church a decade earlier with his colleagues Priscilla and Aquila, they kind of went and split up, and they reached out to very different people. So you can imagine this. People were like, let's go to Wisconsin, and let's reach out to people in Madison and up north. So they were different. Priscilla and Aquila, they spent their time with pagan handworkers. They were rough and tough people. They lived hand to mouth. Every day was a scrabble to survive. Paul, being Paul, hung out in the synagogues, and he converted folks who were quite wealthy, educated, and considered the elite in Corinthian society. So you can imagine then that it's not much of a surprise that conflict arose when these two groups gathered together to worship, as they had clashing ideas about what was proper, what was okay. The scripture passage today highlights just one of their many, many disagreements. And it was about how food, often it was meat, sacrificed to idols, how should that be handled? So one group thought, it's fine, whatever, just eat it. The other group was appalled, considered it this great sin. Now Paul, while he agreed that there was not really a danger in eating the food, he was not interested in writing a legal brief about it. Instead, he was more concerned about appropriate relating with one another. So the point was not really about the meat. The point was how did their actions impact the well-being of the other? So if eating meat was going to cause great distress to someone, then better to refrain from doing so while with that person. It is not that Paul lacked strong convictions. This wasn't like a lukewarm person at all. Paul had strong convictions about specific issues. He had many opinions about everything from circumcision to lawsuits. But he did not want people to miss the forest for the trees, meaning that someone could be technically, theologically correct, but still an asshole. Ever met somebody like that? The famous love passage that is frequently read at weddings. It's in fact from this same letter that Paul wrote to the Corinthian church. And it makes more sense when you understand that this context it was written in. It's the members who were entrenched in their polarizations on proving who was right and who was wrong. So for all the knowledge, all the prophecy, even faith that they could proclaim that they were so great at, none of it mattered if they did not have love. So one can envision Paul ticking off the list of behaviors that he has witnessed in the Corinthian church as he describes specifically what love does not look like. I've always found it kind of ironic when people like to read this at wedding because this passage says a lot about what love does not look like. It is not emptiness. It is not boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing. That one I think seems especially pointed because the Corinthians probably took a special glee in declaring how others were wrong. Probably also people like that. In the end, however, however sophisticated and eloquent a theological argument they could make, no matter how right they were on an issue, if love was not present, then they had nothing. I might feel kind of trite for Paul's answer to the Corinthians' huge, raging conflicts to be something to the effect of, hey, be nicer to each other. It is as simple as that, and of course, it is much harder for us to actually put into practice. Now, this is not about being Midwestern nice, for those of you who are in the Midwest. It's not Midwestern nice, where we avoid any thorny issues for a veneer of peace. Because remember, Paul still engaged in the conflicts in the Corinthian church, and his words could frequently be intense. But never would the members have reason to doubt Paul's love for them. They always knew that. So I want to share a phrase that I use to describe how I think we, as a community, can approach this. It is called holy friction. And it's a framework for entering into divisive issues with Paul's love ethic in mind. So many people avoid conflict for good reason, because friction without purpose is often drama-filled and toxic, with people more interested in taking someone down than seeking wholeness in community. That is not the kind of friction I'm talking about. Watch the dad stands for that, right? Holy friction is purposeful and intentional, with people from different backgrounds coming around the table and staying there even when they disagree and do not see eye to eye, because they are committed to loving each other despite the world's expectation that they hate each other. Inevitably, there will be bumping up against each other. Folks will rub each other the wrong way, and there will be times that it gets really messy, because it is hard to honestly dialogue with people whose views offend you. It will be tempting in those times to get up and leave. But staying at the table, I truly believe, is sacred work. It is sacred work, and that is where we have the opportunity to see Christ's grace unfold and finally experience transformation. We can move beyond polarization when we root ourselves in God's love as described by Paul in his letter to the Corinthians. I do want to make an important caveat though. Paul was cognizant and critical of those who used their power to lord it over others, whether it was knowledge or wealth or status. Who holds power and in what particular kinds of ways? That has to be a central factor in how we approach division, because if we are not attentive to power dynamics, this ethic can be twisted into further abuse. Because if we are real, some disagreements are much more dangerous for certain people to engage in because of the power that can be used against them, stripping them of their rights, putting them at risk for bodily harm, even death. As an Asian American female pastor, I know that I am at more risk when there are certain kinds of people around, and I also know that there are times I hold more power because of who I am with. Recognizing the power that we do have and do not have in various kinds of settings, that is essential in discerning when and how we approach particular differences, especially ones that are prone to quickly escalate. If you're curious to talk more about power dynamics, I encourage you to join me and I for Leftovers Tuesday. In general, I think that more often we are reluctant to engage in differences because the media is constantly showcasing the most extreme and outrageous things that folks will say, because provocation sells. But people, when you take the time to really get to know them, they're more nuanced, they're more complex than these caricatures. I believe that there is a deep hunger amongst many of us to go past these tired tropes so that we can have a genuine and open conversation with someone who is different from us. Wonder and curiosity are mindsets that we need to reintroduce into our public discourse, remembering that we have something to learn from everyone. When we are able to engage in this way, where people have the experience of being truly seen and heard, it gives them also the capacity to do that with others. If you've ever been heard and listened and seen, you then know what that feels like and want to give it to others. It's a positive spread. And as we strengthen our muscles in Paul's ethic of love, we then expand our abilities to do this in even more challenging situations, right? So if you don't like conflict, I'm not suggesting you jump into like the hardest one possible. You just start with something small. We are not the same. So what do? Well, my friends, we start by practicing with each other now.